Texas, but he is proud to call Riverside his home. He's been working in this kind of neighboring movement for a number of years, and he brings with him his wife and new baby boy and 2 pets. So, Ian, the floor is yours.
Thank you. It's so awesome to hear that it was Senator Mary Ware who introduced us to you all. That's really cool. That's really cool. Good morning, everybody. My name is Ian Campbell, and I am the Faith-Based Program Director at the Neighboring Movement. I'm honored to be with you today on behalf of the Neighboring Movement. Seriously, thank you all so much for your time, for coming out today, and I can't wait to learn more about you as well as we kind of go through this. I do a lot of secular work too. I'm not just the faith-based program director. And I get to do every single day like the best job in the world. I get to help people build relationships with their literal immediate neighbors on their blocks. So I'm here today to talk a little bit about how these simple acts, and it's a lot of little simple acts, of knowing and building relationships with your literal immediate neighbors can overcome civic divides and inspire civic participation. I hope that talk is something that is of interest. I will get a little bit into kind of the voter work that we do, but that's not my kind of primary area, so I'm going to do my best to kind of tie that in. But before I get into my talk, I just want to say that I actually have a lot to learn from you, because I found it really interesting in researching your organization and like learning about your origin story as this grassroots association. Just the way that you have brought together people, women from diverse backgrounds as far as political goes. Like I think that is something relatively rare. My understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, but that there are some progressive women and some moderate and maybe some conservative women that have united together to push for moderate candidates and moderate policies. That's my understanding, right? And so that's rare in this time where every political issue becomes a part of a culture war in many cases. Like your identity is tied up with the issues, and so if you support one issue, then that means that you are firmly in this camp or that camp, right? Sorry about the screen. To do that is, to come together across partisan lines is rare and unique. And again, you have wisdom that I would like to learn from you. I am also just curious, and I want to just take a few answers here. I'm curious about the ways that you bump up into this, these civic divides and this polarization in your work. Would anybody share, is there any ways that you have bumped up against this in your work that you, or just in your experience, whether it's individuals or as a group?
By bumped up, do you mean run into?
Yes, exactly, yes. Or you have to, you encounter or swim in this, yes.
It often happens right within families.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And there's some pain in that, right?
Would you repeat that?
It often happens within families.
Oh.
Yeah. Definitely. Yes.
Well, I'm a pretty liberal Democrat in my views, and the nonpartisan races, the city council, the school board, especially city council, I was working on a campaign, and there were Republicans and Democrats both working on this campaign, and so it's like you've got to remain nonpartisan. It's like I just have a hard time not commenting on some of the, it's really hard to not share your viewpoints.
Absolutely.
And they had to remind me constantly to keep my mouth shut, because I am so outspoken.
All right.
But yeah, it's I don't have a problem with someone having an opposite view of me, but I want them to don't agree with.
Yeah, you want to be yourself, to express yourself and not have to bottle it up. right? Like, but also there's challenges there, and you were able to work on a campaign with people across the aisle. That's really cool as well. Any other thoughts?
I'm
Yes.
a retired high school teacher,
Okay.
English teacher,
Okay.
and in the classroom, you have to be very aware of your audience and their parents and, yeah, especially when it comes to the women's side of it and women's rights.
Yes.
I found myself a fairly young liberal mother working for world peace with that belief that it could happen back in the 70s, 80s, early 90s, but found myself becoming a little more conservative as I grew older, which probably is natural. However, the current administration has radicalized me so that I now dig out my peace buttons and I try to use the guide of the book on tyranny as a real undergirding of the kinds of things that I could discover that I could still do. And that is to engage, do eye contact, make a statement of some sort for people to react to if they would like, but to encourage, in a way, dialogue, because I've run up against the more conservatives of my friends who will say, well, let's just not talk about it.
Right.
And I'm thinking, we have to talk about this, but we can do that. If we really try, we can do that. And it's amazing how many people are willing to, if you want to listen as well as share.
Right. That's great. That is really good. And what you just said about eye contact, like that's a great lesson in how to do that. And I have some other things I've run into lately as far as tips of how to have dialogue that are interesting, and maybe we could talk about in the Q&A section a little bit. But I also would love to just, like, in one last piece of great group wisdom, would love to hear from you. What do you think? What are some ways that you think that neighboring relationships on the block or neighborhood level could help overcome some of these civic divides and polarization? Yes.
To find common ground, things that everybody agrees on.
Right. And the neighborhood presents some opportunities for that might be different, and that's kind of one of the main things that I want to talk about today as well. Yes, thank you, sir. Others?
It's harder to be angry at somebody that you actually know.
Yes.
Well, in my neighborhood, there's just not much opportunity.
Okay.
During the COVID virus, we would get together and have wine together Friday afternoons in someone's driveway. But other than that, there just isn't much interaction. There isn't a vehicle there for me. I mean, the last time I had an encounter, a guy was walking his dog and I was putting up a sign in my yard and he said, I want these immigrants out of here. How can you? And
That's scary.
yeah, but I guess it's difficult for me to find groups to integrate into to even have discussions, because my friends and associates are like-minded.
Okay, right, of course, yes. That's good, thank you. Another piece that I want to come back to maybe. Okay, so I hope to echo some of the things that you said actually as we talk about this, because there were some really great little nuggets in there. But I want to get a little bit, first I'm going to take us into polarization a little bit more, and I think there's a next slide. I had the questions up there, sorry y'all. You can go a couple more slides, I think, and yes, and I'm so sorry, we might need to take one light off. This is a hard slide to see, but I'm going to repeat the statistic several times here. Okay, so the fact that we are divided as a country sounds like as obvious as saying that the sky is blue, right? But I was researching for this talk, and I was hit squarely in the face by one particular statistic. And that is that nearly 90% of voters on both sides agree that if the other side gets their way, people like them won't belong in the country anymore. That feels catastrophic to me. Like, will not belong in the country anymore if the other side gets this way, and nearly 90%.
What does that mean, belong in the country? Like they shouldn't be there?
Well,
or they won't fit in?
The people feel that if the other side gets this way, I won't have or people like me won't have a place here anymore, right? That's scary.
I think you can take it further, and that is that they will be ejected from here.
There's
The feeling
absolutely
of real rejection.
Yes. There's also a 2024 Gallup poll that found that a record high 80% of Americans believe that we are greatly divided on the most important values, and I thought that was interesting, the values piece of it. And then this one maybe even more stark, only 18% believe the country is united. And I think that would be a pretty hard belief to have, and that's why only 18% might hold it. I'm not going to speak much about how we got here, but I do want to talk about some things on a psychological level. There's some mechanisms that we're going to run up against if we do want to change the polarization. And I will also make the case that I think we should find ways to not be so polarized. And so the first mechanism speaks directly to this first statistic. And that is, I think, one more slide. Yes, okay. That is this idea that has been talked a lot about by the former U.S. Surgeon General, Vivek Murthy. He said there's this idea called motive attribution asymmetry, and that's a very fancy word just to say that we believe there's something built into our brains that believes that our side or we come to our beliefs out of love, and our opponents come to their beliefs out of hatred, right? And that's something across the spectrum that both sides are believing. And Israelis and Palestinians, he talks about how they have kind of the same idea, and then Democrats and Republicans as well. And so how can you really have dialogue with people when you believe that they, like their actual motive, like their intent is to wake up and be hateful, right? Like that's a hard place, and they believe that about you too, right? It's hard for dialogue. So then the second idea is that Jonathan Haidt, a very ironic and unfortunate last name in this context, says that we act from our gut feelings. That's the primary place that we act, not our logical our logical arguments. Actually, those gut feelings are what happens first, and then we create logical arguments to try to cover for our gut feelings. And he also says that there are some values that are pretty much universal human values. I'll give some examples. Like we all, I think, would value, to some degree, we want people to be loyal to us, right? And we all, to some degree, value caring for others, right? These are some basic values. But you'll know that different cultures, different personalities place higher emphasis on some of those values over others, right? So it's the same values, but conservatives are typically going to put value on things like loyalty more than care, and progressives are more likely to put value on care than loyalty, but most of us would value many of the same things. So the problem is that when we talk to people about politics, we're often speaking to that side of them we're speaking to the logic level. But that's not where we're actually acting from. That's not what is driving us, right? So we're not we're talking to the logical coverings instead of the real like feelings and experiences and values, these emotional moments and stories that brought us to where we are politically. So when we get into Facebook arguments, right, that is, we're not actually speaking to each other's deeper core. We're speaking at this logic level, and so we're kind of speaking past each other. But then another element to that is related to the first thing, is we basically believe oftentimes that people are their arguments. Like that is who they are. And so if we disagree with their arguments, then they must be a hateful person, and because of that, they essentially, we don't have to talk to them anymore. But in reality, they're prioritizing different values of the same relatively universal human values, or they're interpreting those values differently. But if we could get down to the value level and realize that we do have a lot of the same values, we might be able to have a conversation. So ultimately, to find a solution to these mechanisms, we're going to have to find some way to assume positive intent in the other person. We're going to have to realize that they're acting from these experiences and emotions that have shaped them. And ultimately, we can understand and relate much better if we can kind of listen well, make eye contact, ask good questions, uncover some of those root stories that are deeper for them. And then we're going to have to recognize that we're going to need, that we have many of the same human values, and if we can get down to that value level, we can have conversations that are more productive. Instead of when we focus on the logical arguments, start there, right? I want to make one more point about why polarization is so endemic now, and also why it's so dangerous. So I think, okay, this slide's still good. So let's go back to that stat, about 90% of Americans agreeing that if the other side wins, people like them won't belong in America anymore. That's so dangerous to me because belonging is essential to our being. Like, it is a fundamental human need. And when people feel like they don't belong, they get desperate. And when people get desperate, they're more likely to be okay with violence and undemocratic political action or solutions to try to restore their sense of belonging. And I think if you go one slide over, maybe one more slide over? No, it's okay. Actually, I just didn't put it on here. There's a RAND study, so one more slide back, sorry. There's a RAND study that found, that talked to former political extremists from a variety of different backgrounds. And 50% of them said that feelings of marginalization, which I think is really just not belonging, were a major factor in their radicalization. And most also said that loneliness and isolation played a huge role. Now, that's a problem because that same Surgeon General says that we are in a crisis, an epidemic of loneliness. There was a 2024 poll from the American Psychiatric Association that said that 30% of adults are lonely at least once a week. And that is worrying too, because there was a famous Jewish philosopher named Hannah Arendt, and she escaped Nazi Germany and wrote about the origins of totalitarianism. And she argued that totalitarian government bases itself on loneliness, on the experience of not belonging to the world at all. So again, that belonging piece, which is the most radical and desperate experience of humanity. So the more we experience loneliness, the more likely we are going to fall party to and fall prey to these most divisive political rhetorics, to dehumanizing other people and to accepting authoritarian policies. So we have to find some way to tackle loneliness and isolation, but also we just have to, I think at the core to overcoming polarization is to humanize other people. Humanization is key. We're going to have to see people and to be deeply seen. We're going to have to, there's a great book on that, by the way. That we're going to have to tell our stories to other people and listen to their stories. We're going to have to be vulnerable, right? We're going to have to create a sense of belonging and form associations and networks that we organize ourselves in. Formal associations like this one, or just like informal networks of neighbors to overcome loneliness. So that's why the neighboring movement has really embraced this need, and we say that the place that we are most likely to be able to humanize other people is at the neighborhood scale. Okay, so next slide. I'm bad at managing the slides, I'm sorry. These were some of the key things, and we can get back to that, but one more slide. Okay, so I have a mentor. He's a Catholic priest named Father Edwin John. He's in India, and he started a movement called the Neighborocracy movement. So like global governance from below by neighbors, and there are now millions of people starting in India. It started with adults, but very quickly the children rapidly outpaced adults in their skill at organizing. So there are millions of children involved in these neighborhood children parliaments, and a fair amount of adults involved in neighborhood parliaments of adults. These are forums in which people self-govern many decisions that affect their daily lives through directly democratic, hyper-local assemblies on their blocks. And he argues that neighborhoods are the most important arena for pretty much any form of political action because, well, there's a lot of things that we don't have in common, but one thing that we all have in common, he argues, is that we all have neighbors somewhere, right? We could live on a farm separated by many acres from a neighbor, but there is a neighbor there, right? Or we can live on the other side of a wall, right, with a neighbor, or some of us somewhere in between, but we all have neighbors. And that's where he also believes that we can best begin our journey toward humanization with neighbors. So I want to tell a little parable that might get you thinking about this. This is something he tells, and I think it's really good. So imagine a bus. I don't know if any of you have ever ridden a megabus or like a Greyhound, but think about like sometimes they get a little crowded, so imagine it's hot, maybe the air conditioning's not working very well, so it's hot and stuffy, and you are frustrated and annoyed just in general, right? You don't really want to be there, but you're on this journey, and in fact, there are no seats. So you are holding on to the little strap, and you look across the aisle, there's some other people holding on to the straps, and you're just waiting, right? And as you're sweaty, it's stuffy, and as the ride goes on, finally a seat opens up. So you look at it, and then you notice that there's another person looking at it right there. So you're looking at each other, you look at the seat, you're trying to be nice, but you're really ready to sit down, so you start making your way over there. The other person does too. And then suddenly you start to maybe just do a little bit of like you're using your body to try to get into the seat, boxing out a little bit, right? And in the hoopla, somebody else sees that opportunity. Is like, oh, go take the seat. And they take the seat, right? Well, now, not only are you still hot, you're still sweaty, you're still annoyed, you're a little embarrassed by how you just acted, and you're like, you still got a long way to go. So you're sitting there and you're fuming for a little bit, and then you realize it's still a long way to go, and so somehow you start to strike up conversation with the person that you were just a little bit vying for the same seat with. And you actually realize, like maybe you see a shirt that they're wearing or something that identifies them as like, oh, there's something I could talk to them about. And so it's maybe small talk at first, but then you realize, wow, your daughter goes to that school, my daughter goes to that school. You're from that neighborhood, I'm from that neighborhood. And you start to talk, and then you even laugh a little bit, and before you know it, a lot of the ride is past, and you almost don't notice that the seat opens up again, or another seat opens up again. And this time, you go right back to competing for the seat, except this time, you're not competing to take the seat, you're competing to give the seat to the other person. Each person is kind of, oh, you take it, no, you take it, right? So what changed? I would say that what changed is humanization. There was a face-to-face relationship that was built. You saw the other person as a human, you learn a little bit more about them, and then you can relate, right? So we humanize people by developing face-to-face relationships. Neighborhoods are a place where all of us can find other people in which to develop our relationships with. And another mentor of ours, Cormac Russell, argues, kind of based on this point, that the neighborhood is the smallest and most important unit of change in democracy. There's nothing like the power of proximity to humanize. If we scale down to the most local level, we come to a space where we might be able to see past the yard signs and build real relationships. And unfortunately, it seems like that individual walking his dog might not have, at least not first, not ready, but I think generally there's an opportunity there. We can build real relations, and we can often tackle even real issues together. So if there's a pothole that's been plaguing neighbors for months, you drive over it, it doesn't really matter necessarily who you voted for in a national election as to whether or not that pothole is going to get filled. And if the city won't do it, you and your neighbors can go together to Home Depot and buy some asphalt, I've done this, and pour it into the hole and tamp it down and flatten it out, and you fix the problem, right? So, and it didn't really matter who you voted for. I want to give a few more examples to this regard. You can go to the next slide. Okay, so I want to tell you about the most unlikely neighbors. Okay, I had some neighbors on my street. There was two couples. One was the most Fox News loving, like conservative people you can imagine. Okay, met most of the stereotypes. The neighbors across were almost the stereotypical opposite. Like, you could not think of more opposite people. A lesbian interracial couple who had a pride flag, and one of them worked for an abortion provider. Okay, so quite opposites. Yet somehow, through being neighbors, they found some common ground. The husband and one family and one of the wives and the other really found that they had a commonality. They loved to walk in the neighborhood. They were also involved in the neighborhood group chat, or the block level group chat that they had. And the lesbian couple ended up bringing over some artisan cupcakes to the neighbors, to the conservative neighbors, right? And then at one point, the conservative neighbors, as they've been building this relationship, they found out that the father of one of the women died. And so they went around to all the houses on the street and said, will you sign this card for our dear neighbor? And they brought it over. Small gesture of humanization. Now I want to talk about how these things can have some political influence too. There were some neighbors that I knew as well that lived next to a church, and the church, they went to the same church. The church was next to a mobile home park, and they ended up chairing a couple again. They chaired the church's ministry with the mobile home park. Now, they loved the wall. They were big Trump people, very afraid of illegal immigration, as they would say, right? Now, but they also really cared about the people in that mobile home park. And so they listened to them. And they had the people tell them about the things that they cared about and that they were dealing with. And what they discovered is that many of them had landlord issues. And the landlords were not repairing their stuff. They were living in very difficult conditions, and they were not responsive at all. So they thought, well, we know a guy we're going to talk to him about the tenants union coming to town to help organize these individuals. Okay? The tenants union is full of anarchists, socialists, and communists. Okay? But there they are working together. Then the tenants union discovers that a lot of them are afraid to do any organizing because they're undocumented, many of them. And they're afraid that if they organize, they'll get deported. So, what does a conservative couple do? They search everywhere for a immigration attorney to come speak to them and to help them build their case, work with the tenants union so that they can organize for better lives. Why? Because they cared about real people at a face-to-face level. I've also seen this happen many times in like natural disasters. You have Christians and Muslims and like what do they call it? The Cajun army? Not, you know what I'm talking about? The Cajun army or whatever, that they're really relatively conservative rural folk and like really radical leftists. They all work together in natural disasters. They run into the problem, right? You could also, neighbors might partner together to build an example. It'd be like, this here is this, it's hard to see, but on the right, so this one on the left is an example of that kind of grassroots mutual aid disaster relief. And on the right here is a place in Wichita called Make ICT, and it's a makerspace where people pool together tools and machinery. Tool libraries kind of have a similar purpose, but here you can go to this space and use all sorts of really heavy, here's a CNC mill, heavy equipment. It's a collectivization of the means of production, if you will, right? It's a really powerful idea. But you can find a libertarian who might really think this is a good idea, and my dad was actually one of these people. He had the idea for a tool library without ever, knowing it existed, and he even said, let's pool our flour, our sugar. It was about space for him, storage. It was practical, and it was in the tradition of the old barn raisings, right? Whereas the liberal might think this is a great example of another public good. And the leftist might think this is grassroots, non-state communism in action. But it doesn't matter what they believe, they're all working together on the common project. There's a book called Palaces for a People, for the people, that argues that we build culture by building something together locally. And that's what we're doing when we get to know our neighbors, and we're acting from shared values and our gifts to clean up after a disaster, or to listen to tenants, or to give care to one another. When there's a common project to be done, especially at the hyper-local level, we can work really effectively across political lines on real issues that affect quality of life. And in fact, issues that in many cases we would outsource to politicians, but instead we're doing it together. At the neighborhood scale, of course, we're much more removed from the divisive, partisan media that's like egging us on against our political opponents. And I just haven't found an arena better yet than the neighborhood scale, or even the block scale, for overcoming these civic divides. Okay, next slide. So let's talk a little bit about the neighboring movements approach that we just really love so much. We follow an approach called asset-based community development. And that basically believes that all people have gifts. We're all gifted, and most people would actually be willing to share those gifts if they're only asked. They're waiting on the invitation. Our neighborhoods are treasure chests, and we get to train people. We get to pay people. This is a really cool thing that Neighboring Movement has been able to do thanks to grants. We get to pay people to go on these treasure hunts in their neighborhoods and make the invisible visible. We train people from going to knowing however many neighbors they know, which is often 0, 1, or 2. That's like the average American. To learning their names, maybe exchanging contact info, to exchanging care with one another in some sort of way, to finding one neighbor on their block that can help them plan a small, intentional block gathering designed to help people see the abundance of gifts, passions, skills, possibilities, stories that are on every block. That's what we do. And we have this tool that I love. I think it's the most humanizing thing, one of the most humanizing things we can do with our neighbors. And that's to sit down with them and ask them questions, real good questions that are designed to draw out that uniqueness, those things that make them come alive, those talents, skills, the things that make them lose track of time because they're so passionate about those gifts, and then we get to invite them to use those in concert with their neighbors for the common good. And that's a real space of action. And we call these learning conversations, but in our faith-based world, we call them holy listening conversations, because really that's what they are. Very few of us will ever have somebody sit down with us and ask us to tell our stories and to share just undivided attention, share the things that give us life. That feels sacred. And then we take all that and we help our organizers map the assets. If you can go a few slides over, I'll just show you real quick and then we can come back. One more. Something like this. We learn all these things about our neighbors, and then we help them map those assets and look for connections between neighbors. So we're matching our neighbors' gifts to gifts and their gifts to gaps in our neighborhood. And we're connecting them. We're introducing people to each other based on those gifts. So in this partisan, we can go back a couple slides, sorry. In this partisan, really polarized national context, we can start to think of each other as suspicious and others, right? Instead of well-intentioned people that happen to live in really one of the most complicated times in human history, where we are being bombarded constantly by information, vying for our attention and vying for our perspectives, skewing our perspectives constantly. And we're trying to make the best decisions that we can. But in this context, we see each other as the others. We're disempowered, and we end up spending so much time canvassing gridlocked legislatures, right? I'm sure you have been frustrated about gridlock before. And courts, right? To solve our problems and to make decisions that ultimately the politicians who we're asking to make them are relatively well removed from the consequences of those decisions. And that can feel very disempowering. We can get to a point where neighbors feel this sense of scarcity. They look around at the problems on their block, right? Here in this first, crime, violence, homeless. It's the glass half empty approach. Crime, violence, homeless, empty parking lots, drugs, you name it. We see those things and we think, wow, we can't do this. But when we learn the gifts of our neighbors and we creatively visualize them on that asset map I showed you, we can reframe our neighbors and neighborhoods as gifted and full of collective capacity, possibility, and local abundance, and the potential for shared power. And so I want to actually show you through a little activity. So if we can go to the next slide. Could somebody name one community issue? We can do, we'll do one community issue, or you could name maybe a proactive project or dreams that neighbors might have. Anything that you think might be faced in any given neighborhood.
Speeding on the streets.
What is it?
Speeding on the streets.
Speeding on the streets. Okay. Thank you, Kathy. I appreciate that. So let's go to that asset map. The next slide. Now, I really apologize, y'all. I hope that you can see this. I don't know why it's not showing up in the color and vibrancy that I wanted. If you need to, you can take a picture and kind of zoom in. But what I would love to do is invite y'all to use some of these gifts, because these are actually just a sampling of random gifts of neighbors that I have on my block. Normally an asset map would have a name and then would have all the things that they do, but I just took one gift from kind of each person or some people and put them up there, random gifts. And so let's just look at these and see, are there neighbors that we could connect? Are there skills that we can connect to overcome that? That issue of speeding on a block. So just to show some of them, we got one-on-one listing skills, we got passionate about local history, restaurants and history, canning, poetry, adult music education, carpentry, daily upkeep to home renovations, successfully advocating for road repairs through City Hall, baking bread, inspirational speaker on overcoming grief and tragedy, rents bikes for free, medical treatment for addiction, outdoor gardening and houseplants, organizes for public transport, sewing, makes hospital gowns / bags, mentors students on confidence, made pocket guides and maps to local wildlife and animals, skilled dinner host, makes greeting cards, trained mediator, visits neighbors in the hospital, passionate about helping people overcome loneliness and polarization, event planner, made a block map / directory, organizes day and summer camps on physics, fermentation, created a time exchange baby swap, sitting swap for mothers, and built a screen attached to his garage for outdoor movie nights. So is there anything there that you think could connect to overcome this issue of speeding on a street?
Successfully advocating for road repairs.
Yeah, that's a pretty that's a pretty obvious one, right? Yeah, absolutely. Yes. Who do we connect that person to?
The block map.
The person who makes the block map, you said? Yeah, definitely. I think there's real benefit there. Any others that you see?
Well, people with children, because speeding and children playing outside is a problem.
Absolutely. Local stakeholders who are going to care.
And the mediator.
The
Right.
mediator, right? There's going to be, you're going to need some facilitation and how you organize, right? But there's some conflict that probably can happen too. People get a little testy when it comes to roads. What else? Rent bikes for free. Yes, I think that's a very important stakeholder in this process. I see organizers for public transport. If we can reduce the number of cars on the road, then maybe that can help solve the problem. Artists too, because in my own neighborhood, I'm trying to help organize neighbors to paint a mural in the intersection to have this kind of psychological effect that this place is cared for and that people might need to slow down. And it also draws us all together and builds this sense of we did a project together, right? So that's another one that's going to require, that's going to require a carpenter or somebody with those kind of skills at actually organizing the physical space. It's going to require a lot of things there. So I think that's just to show you, I think it's a cool, I have so far not seen an issue that this random group of neighbors could not at least go some way towards acting on, or if none of them can do it, they know somebody who can, guaranteed. And I even have a game that would prove that as well. So that's the powerlessness of connecting, or the power of connecting gifts. But I do want to make one more comment about polarization, one more assertion. And that is that polarization is also about powerlessness. So partisan media and online pundits, they prey on our sense of powerlessness. They stoke our anger by playing on this sense that we are out of control, that we have no power left. And they encourage us to blame the other side as the problem, and then we end up swimming in these echo chambers of people who think just like us. But when neighbors take stock of their collective assets, we see that actually many aspects of our lives could be managed by everyday neighbors in associations and informal groups. We have so much of what we need to run a functioning society within our reach. And like I said, if we don't, we know somebody who can. So outside of the neighborhood, then, that's one space. But then outside of the neighborhood, still locally, let's talk about local elections real quick. Because local elections are theoretically the space where people can practice political action more humanely, because we're a little more removed from that partisan, media nightmare that is like partisan media, right? And yet the voter turnout in the local primaries, does anybody know what the percentage was, this current one? Yes.
Well, I know for District 1, it was less than 10%.
Okay, yes, I heard 6 something. Yeah, I think it was 6.89%. And I'm really, really grateful that organizations and people like you and y'all, this organization, are making efforts to get people caring about elections and to change that. That is extremely important. I believe our political energy would be best served if it was focused more and more locally. Yet in our culture, Washington politics is the big spectacle, as if that is the place that is actually the primary unit of change in a democracy. And I think that we've got that precisely opposite, and we must work to change that. But when we work in elections, we also find that it's relationships that have the real power. There are studies that consistently find that a simple text message or like other kind of invite from a personal invite from a friend massively increases the chance of you going to the polls than any other method. A Columbia researcher found in 2020 that 13.2, I think we can go to the next slide. There might be a slide about this actually. One more. Thank you. Yeah, and I actually did kind of mean to cover this part about we could have stopped Trump in 2016 because I didn't know if anybody here might support Trump. I meant to put a logo of the voter network, but anyway, that's true. Okay, a Columbia researcher found a 13.2 percentage point increase in turnout when voters were contacted by a friend versus a stranger. So we have the honor at the Neighboring Movement of partnering with the voter network every year to hire a paid nonpartisan or hire a bunch of paid nonpartisan election mobilizers in Kansas who work on their friends and family members to get them to go out and vote. And not just the national elections, but all elections. We get to do it every year. And that's really this awesome opportunity that we have to encourage civic engagement at the Neighboring Movement. But it's not our only way. There was a 2004, and there's a picture, again, for some reason it's not showing up, it was the next slide, but a 2004 Community Nonpartisan Voters Guide argued, don't just vote, get active. You can vote once or twice a year, but it's what you do every day that counts. Don't abdicate your power to representatives. They use so-called representatives because I guess they didn't think that they're being represented. Take responsibility for the ways you can change the world yourselves. And we must remember what the early French commentator on American democracy, Alexis de Tocqueville, said in 1840 about America. He said that the progress of all the rest of American democracy depended on the progress of everyday Americans coming together to tackle as many of life's issues as possible in local, decentralized associations. And he marveled at Americans because instead of always trying to delegate our authority to politicians with our votes or demanding that the state create another commission to solve a problem, like what was happening in Europe all the time, we gathered together in every type of association, political, cultural, neighborhood, religious, professional, social, you name it, to be active producers of solutions, like this association. Civic associational life, he saw as the safeguard of a democratic system. But there's this book, Bowling Alone, that really talks about how our associational life has rapidly plummeted. And in that, society has lost much of our capacity to solve our own problems. And we end up having to outsource more of our capacity to these gridlocked and polarized governments. And then we get really angry and more polarized when they don't deliver. So the activity that we just did showed that any given block of neighbors or local citizens, simply by taking stock of what is already in their collective cupboard, if you will, like what they already have and what they already care about and they love to do, things that get us up, right? Any block has an immense amount of power and agency that they could do without having to wait for the next election cycle. Relational voter organizing is one prong of our effort to increase civic participation. It needs to be done, and we invite you, again, we pay election mobilizers, but y'all are already doing great work. But we would invite you to join us in that work or partner with us in some way. But we also want to make the argument that most of the year, the truest source of untapped civic power can be found right outside your front door. And with a few simple tools and a whole lot of intentionality, each of us can tap into that power and help chip away at our civic divide, one block at a time. Thanks so much, y'all. Appreciate it.
Okay, Mary tasked me with making sure we end the meeting on time. So we've got about 9, maybe 10 minutes for questions.
Yes.
Did you organize a neighborhood night out earlier this month?
I actually had another speaking event I was preparing for, but we do in our neighborhood around the office. One of our neighbors organized a neighborhood night out, and a lot of us went to that. And then we also National Good Neighbor Day is coming up on September 28th, and so some people in Riverside are helping to are considering the idea of organizing a some sort of music and creation caravan. But then there's also open streets is that day as well, so lots of opportunities for civic engagement for sure.
I've been at this for a long time in my own community, trying to get any traction whatsoever. I see it as a big problem with communication. We've lost our newspapers, and people, when we lost our newspapers, we lost that awareness of what was happening in our local government. When we lost that awareness of what was happening in our local government, we lost an interest.
Yeah.
And so it's really difficult to get out and knock on neighbors' doors and have a dialogue, because you're all talking from such different points of view.
Yes.
And they do not know what's going on. I live in Bel Air.
Okay.
We have a paper that comes out once a month. Okay, once a month. It's coming from the city. I have tried all sorts of ways to get that to be more representative of what really is taking place, but it's really, really difficult.
Right.
So I like this idea. I just am not getting any traction, and I have tried. Like, I'm on the tree board,
Yeah.
so we have a cleanup.
Great.
It's usually 2 or 3 of us there.
Right. Right.
Okay.
Right.
I go try to get the city to advertise it. You can't even read the print of this advertising they do, and it has been now a 3-year fight. Okay.
That's so hard.
But I keep going. But there are, I think, within our built environment, we've created these situations. So this, for instance, there's a state law that states only the people in a development, only the people within 200 feet of that development are notified. All of the towns have adopted that very state law. In reality, the towns could say everybody in the town is going to be notified.
Right.
And there's a goodness to that, because everybody is financially responsible.
Right. That's
So
good.
that's an example. It's just really hard.
It is. It's very hard. It takes very slow culture building. I will say, and then it's not always a perfect solution. I will say what I'm doing on my block. When I moved here, I just started walking my dog every single day. Just before I ever talked to anyone, I just wanted my face visible to my neighbors, so that people, when I start to build up the courage to go talk to neighbors, I'm not some stranger, I'm familiar, right? So I did that for months and months and months. Different times, varied it. I started doing my gardening out in my front yard, started doing things to make myself visible. And then I slowly started talking to neighbors, and they would tell me about, like, wow, we used to leave our doors unlocked, and we used to, any neighbor could come over for a cup of sugar, as if that time is totally gone. And I tried to convince them, and I think I have slowly, that time is still here if we're intentional. And then they start to slowly trust me and share all sorts of things going on in their lives with me. And so we built relationships. Then I had those, I've I'm working on the scale of 40 households, and I've had about 35 one-on-one conversations, sitting down with neighbors for an hour, asking them about the things they care about. And then I write them a thank you note, and I say, here's 3 neighbors or 5 neighbors or whatever, based on the things that you care about that you should get to know. And I'm happy to make the introduction. My goal is to host an event and write an invite reminding them, where I'm going to get people mingling together, talking about their gifts, the things they care about, and then we're going to do that asset map activity and actually add our assets through the conversations, and then ask people to look for connections. And then I plan to have neighbors gather around tables based on the different things that they care about, different buckets. I guarantee there's going to be a gardening bucket and a book club bucket and a stewardship of Oak Park bucket. And there's going to be all these little tables, and I'm going to ask neighbors to go there and organize as a miniature ad hoc or potentially permanent or long-lasting association based on the things that they already care about. That's the key, I think. Finding if you can act from people's gifts and then connect them and mobilize together, it doesn't feel like as much of an uphill slog for people. But that took like years of just slow relationship building, asking questions. And so we'll see how it goes, but that's kind of my approach. I'm calling it a neighborhood action and connection circle, and we're going to meet at least once a month to connect around those gifts and mobilize new projects and share what we're doing together. So it's on a scale of 2 blocks. So I don't know if that is at all helpful, but it's really about that. Like that can be one thing that can overcome that kind of sense of stagnancy maybe. But it's just a shot, you know.
I think it's so important for individuals to feel as if they are something, somebody, a gift that they can use and share. Our society has a forced isolation, and people walk out of their homes in my block looking at their cell phone, to get in their car, to watch their cell phone as they drive away to work.
Yeah.
I know the pattern. We also have a number of Vietnamese. So language is a barrier and an isolator. However, they communicate because they're almost a part of one family. Have some new neighbors, and I have said to myself, take your cane when the weather moderates a little bit and walk to the corner and introduce yourself like you used to do, because I still can do that.
That's great.
And I had not been, it's been to the back of my mind, and you have helped me to pull that forward. I'll do that sooner rather than later.
And if you want a group of people to help hold you accountable and work with you, and you can get paid to do that actually through our programs as well. Any other questions, thoughts? Sorry I bumped us up against time. I really didn't. I guess I was speaking slower than I practiced.
I live in the county and I do have a few neighbors, but I probably